In February 1944, the U.S. Navy launched one of the most decisive and devastating operations of the Pacific War, Operation Hailstone. Over 2 days, from February 17th to 18th, the skies above Truk Lagoon, Japan's prized naval stronghold, erupted into chaos. What had once been considered the Gibraltar of the Pacific, a fortress anchoring Japan's defensive perimeter, became a graveyard of ships and aircraft. It was a turning point that exposed the vulnerability of Japan's fleet and demonstrated the overwhelming power of American technology, coordination, and industrial might. For years, Truk Lagoon had been one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most important bases. Situated in the Caroline Islands, it was both geographically and strategically perfect, a natural harbor protected by a ring of coral reefs, deep enough to hide large warships, and far enough from major Allied bases to be considered secure. The Japanese began fortifying Truk in the 1930s, turning it into a vast naval complex with airfields, repair docks, fuel depots, and defensive gun batteries. It became home to the combined fleet, Japan's most powerful concentration of ships, including aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers. By 1943, however, Japan's strategic situation had begun to deteriorate. The U.S. Navy's island-hopping campaign, coupled with devastating losses in earlier battles like Midway and Guadalcanal, was pushing Japanese forces back across the Pacific. Truk remained a symbol of Japanese naval strength, but its days as an untouchable base were numbered. American intelligence had long been studying Truk. Through intercepted radio transmissions, aerial reconnaissance, and reports from coast watchers, the U.S. learned the layout of its defenses and the scale of the forces stationed there. In early 1944, Admiral Chester Nimitz and his staff concluded that a direct strike could cripple Japan's ability to project naval power in the Central Pacific. The operation was codenamed Hailstone. It would be a massive, coordinated assault involving carrier-based aircraft, surface ships, and submarines. The objective was simple but bold: destroy Japanese air power at Truk, sink as many ships as possible, and render the base useless. Task Force 58, commanded by Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitzger, was assigned the mission. It was a formidable fleet: 9 aircraft carriers, 6 battleships, 10 cruisers, and over 60 destroyers. Among them were the USS Iowa and USS New Jersey, the pride of the U.S. Navy. These Iowa-class battleships were technological marvels for their time, fast, heavily armored, and equipped with advanced radar-directed fire control systems. Each carried 9 16-inch guns capable of hurling shells weighing over a ton at targets more than 20 miles away. As the task force steamed toward Truk, the operation was kept under strict secrecy. The fleet's route was carefully planned to avoid detection, and radio silence was maintained. In the early hours of February 17, 1944, as dawn broke over the Pacific, the first American aircraft lifted off the carrier decks. What followed was one of the most concentrated air assaults of the entire war. The Japanese defenders were caught off guard. Although they had radar installations, they were primitive compared to American systems and provided little warning. When the first wave of American aircraft appeared over Truk, many Japanese planes were still lined up on the airfields. American Hellcats and Avengers swept in, strafing and bombing with precision. Within hours, Japan's air defenses were effectively neutralized. Over 200 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground and in the air. With air superiority established, the U.S. fleet moved in closer. Dive bombers and torpedo planes began attacking ships anchored within the lagoon. The targets were numerous: cargo ships, tankers, destroyers, cruisers, and auxiliaries, the lifeline of Japan's Pacific operations. The lagoon erupted with explosions as torpedoes struck hulls and bombs detonated amidst ships desperately trying to escape.
The Japanese response was disorganized and frantic.
Many vessels tried to flee through narrow passages in the reef, only to be intercepted by waiting American submarines. Among them were USS Tang, USS Skate, and USS Tunney, whose crews sank several escaping ships. The coordination between the air and submarine forces was one of the most effective examples of joint warfare during the conflict. While the carrier's air wings dominated from above, the U.S. battleships played their part from the perimeter. For the first time, radar-guided naval gunfire was used in a major Pacific operation. The USS Iowa and USS New Jersey unleashed their 16-inch guns in shore bombardments, targeting Japanese installations on the islands surrounding the lagoon. The fire control systems, using analog computers and radar data, allowed gunners to hit targets with astonishing accuracy, even when obscured by clouds or smoke. The thunder of the Iowa's guns rolled across the ocean, each salvo a testament to how technology had transformed naval warfare. The battle continued into the next day. Waves of American aircraft continued to hammer Truk, systematically destroying fuel depots, supply dumps, and hangars. The lagoon became a fiery trap. Ships burned from stem to stern, ammunition exploded in chain reactions, and oil fires turned the water into a sea of flames. Japanese sailors abandoned their vessels, diving into the lagoon as strafing aircraft circled overhead. By the end of February 18th, the destruction was staggering. The U.S. Navy had sunk or destroyed more than 40 Japanese ships, including cruisers, destroyers, auxiliaries, and transports, totaling over 200,000 tons of shipping. More than 250 Japanese aircraft were lost. American losses were minimal, 12 aircraft and a handful of airmen. Truk Lagoon, once Japan's invincible bastion, had been reduced to ruin. The aftermath of Operation Hailstone was profound. Japan's ability to reinforce or resupply its garrisons in the Central Pacific was crippled. The loss of fuel, aircraft, and ships further weakened an already overextended navy. More importantly, the psychological blow was immense. Truk had symbolized Japan's naval supremacy. Its destruction sent a clear message that no base, no matter how remote or fortified, was beyond the reach of the U.S. Navy. In the weeks that followed, American reconnaissance flights confirmed the scale of the devastation. The lagoon's waters were littered with wrecks, many still visible from the air. For Japan, Truk ceased to exist as a viable naval base. The combined fleet, which had already withdrawn before the attack, would never again operate from a secure forward anchorage. From that point on, Japan's remaining major warships would be forced to retreat closer to home waters, ultimately to be destroyed in later battles like the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. Operation Hailstone also demonstrated the growing maturity of American carrier warfare. By 1944, the U.S. Navy had refined its doctrine of fast carrier task forces, integrating air power, surface firepower, and logistics into a seamless system. The coordination displayed at Truk would soon be replicated on an even larger scale as the fleet advanced across the Central Pacific toward the Marianas, the Philippines, and eventually Japan itself. The technological aspect of the operation cannot be overstated. American advances in radar, fire control, and naval computing gave commanders an unprecedented level of situational awareness. The radar systems aboard the Iowa-class battleships could track enemy aircraft and ships beyond the horizon, while analog computers calculated firing solutions in seconds. The result was accuracy and lethality that the Japanese simply could not match. It was not just industrial superiority, but technological innovation that made victories like Hailstone possible.
Despite its overwhelming success, Operation Hailstone also carried a grim human toll. Thousands of Japanese sailors and soldiers perished in the inferno, many trapped aboard sinking ships or cut off on the islands with no hope of evacuation. In the decades after the war, divers exploring the lagoon would find their remains still entombed within rusting wrecks. The lagoon became both a war grave and an underwater museum, a silent reminder of the ferocity of the battle. In modern times, Truk Lagoon, now known as Truk Lagoon in the Federated States of Micronesia, has become one of the world's most famous diving destinations. Beneath its clear waters lie dozens of Japanese ships, aircraft, and vehicles preserved almost perfectly by the tropical environment. Divers can swim through the holds of cargo ships still containing trucks, tanks, and ammunition. Aircraft rest on the seabed with their machine guns and instruments intact. It is a haunting underwater time capsule, the frozen moment of Japan's lost fleet. For historians, Operation Hailstone remains a pivotal example of how warfare had evolved by 1944. No longer were decisive battles fought primarily between battleships on the open sea, as in earlier eras. Instead, dominance now came from the skies, from carriers that could project power hundreds of miles away. The destruction of Truk proved that air superiority and precision coordination had replaced brute naval engagements as the key to victory. The lessons of Hailstone echoed through the remainder of the Pacific campaign. When the U.S. struck the Marianas, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the same tactics, rapid carrier strikes, radar coordination, and overwhelming firepower would define the fighting. Each battle brought American forces closer to Japan's home islands, and each reaffirmed that technology and adaptability could overcome even the most entrenched defenses. Admiral Mitzger, whose calm leadership guided Task Force 58 through the operation, would later be praised for the precision and discipline of his pilots. Many of them were veterans of earlier battles, hardened and skilled. Their ability to strike targets accurately, avoid friendly fire, and return to carriers in poor weather demonstrated how far the U.S. Navy's training and doctrine had come since the dark days of 1942. The Iowa and New Jersey, meanwhile, continued to serve with distinction throughout the war. Their massive guns and radar systems would be used again in later bombardments across the Pacific. For the sailors aboard those ships, Hailstone was more than just another operation. It was proof of what their ships were built to do: bring the war directly to Japan's doorstep. Operation Hailstone may not have the same name recognition as Pearl Harbor or Midway, but its impact was undeniable. It marked the end of Japan's forward naval bases and the beginning of America's unbroken advance toward victory. In just 2 days, the U.S. Navy had demonstrated mastery of the sea and sky, a feat born of courage, planning, and the relentless drive to learn from every prior engagement. When the smoke cleared and the last American aircraft returned to their carriers, Truk Lagoon lay silent. Fires still burned on the horizon, and oil slicks spread across the water. Beneath the surface, the wrecks of Japan's once proud fleet settled into the depths, never to rise again. Today, the story of Operation Hailstone is often overshadowed by the larger battles that followed, yet it remains one of the clearest demonstrations of how the tide of the Pacific War had turned. The fortress once thought impregnable had fallen in 2 days, not to a siege, but to precision, coordination, and technological power. It was, in every sense, the strike that broke Japan's shield and announced that America's reach across the Pacific had become unstoppable.